morning, good morning. We are Live, Facebook Live, Blog Talk Radio, YouTube. Good morning, good morning, good morning. We are going to have a very interesting broadcast this morning. I am super excited about our guest. Just want to see who's going to join us this morning. Let's see who's going to chime in and watch and listen. Of course, we will have a call-in number to put up so you can call in and actually talk to our guests. And of course, our co-hosts that always join us. Good morning. Say good morning. Good morning. Good morning. They're chiming in. They're coming. They're coming. Good morning. Again, we are Live right here on Facebook. I am Tamara Johnson Shealey. Good morning. Good morning. Good morning. All right. So our broadcast this morning that it's not just me. Meet Sairo Rao. She is a hero of mine, and you'll get to meet her in just a moment and learn why and hear her story. Just know that politics, whether it be right here in Georgia or across the nation, politics, I tell you, is a strange beast. I've had my share of it as a 3-time candidate for the Georgia State Senate, run in 2014, run again in 2016, run again in 2018. I've done it, been there, done that, seen it all, had a front row seat inside of the Democratic Party. And I can just tell you that we got some issues. And I'm a true Democrat. I do believe in the democratic principles. But I saw things that I never thought I'd see. I experienced things I never thought I'd experience. And it was disheartening. It was discouraging. It was painful. It was hurtful. And I'm not the only one. So this broadcast today is not just me. I want you to meet Sairo Rao. She's going to join us in just a bit, but I'm going to, of course, bring in my trusty co-host that always talk to us candidly and openly, Mr. David Slavin. We're going to bring him in. So let's say good morning. Hey, David.
Hey, good morning, Tamara.
Good morning. How are you?
Doing okay.
Good, good, good. You know, we're always talking about acknowledge the divide. So this morning with Saira, we'll hear the divide. We'll hear what has happened to her up in Denver, in the Colorado Congressional race that she ran, and hear her story. David, you ready?
Yeah, I'm ready.
Awesome, awesome. Mr. John, let's see where he is this morning. There he is. Looking all handsome. Good morning, John.
Good morning, Tamara. Good morning, Dave. How are you guys doing this morning?
Good morning. And we're ready. We're getting excited. We have a beautiful co-host who has had an experience inside of the Colorado, on her campaign for the Colorado Congress. So we get to hear from her, John, and we always talk candidly about withholding the vote. And it's not an attack on our voting system. It's a time to encourage and empower those who are sitting on the sidelines, who have the power to sway electoral politics one way or the other, but we have to get them off the sidelines, and we have to acknowledge their silence. We have to hear that silence and know and encourage them and empower them to get out and vote. Right, John?
Most definitely. And we have an election here in the 40th district coming up this Tuesday, a runoff for the 6th congressional district. Yeah. So that's a very important race coming up.
Yeah, and we just have to encourage people. It's not about shaming or guilting people into voting. Black and brown people, we have to ask for what we want. And maybe not even just ask, demand that we now have yes, that's a better word, demand that we have representation and we get something out of the deal. Because for so many, forever, we don't ever get anything. These races are won and lost, and we're still always sitting on the sideline as Black and brown people. And we're demanding something now. We're not just asking. So let's bring in our guest. I'm so excited to have her, Miss Sairo Rao, and I'm making sure to say I'm using my consonants in my body. Am I saying it correct, Saira?
Rao like pal.
Pow. Get them, girl.
Wow.
Good morning.
Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Good morning. I saw your post. I've watched you politically, and I wanted to bring you on because I want to share your story right here in Georgia and those that are across the nation watching and listening to what we're talking about, what we've been talking about, because you have a story that's, you know what, these stories aren't being told. David is always talking about telling our stories, and these are stories that need to be told. So I'm going to let you tell the story. So I'm not going to even put words in your mouth.
Sure. I'll go for it. So I'm 44 years old, daughter of Indian immigrants, first generation American, born and raised in Richmond, Virginia. Spent the majority of my adult life in New York City and moved to Denver, Colorado 5 years ago. And I can safely say that white supremacy is alive and well in every region. And I think that just like Democrats like to scapegoat Republicans for white supremacy, so too the rest of the country likes to scapegoat the South. And I would say that racism is totally equal in all three places. It plays itself out in different ways. But, moving to Denver certainly hasn't cured us of experiencing racism. And what I've experienced in the past 7 months is I'm hearing a bit of a...
Yeah, if somebody is on the broadcast watching at the same time, they might want to not watch. Go ahead.
Anyway, the past 7 months have been very illuminating to me. And so let me just kind of take a step back. I was a lawyer on Wall Street for a few years after law school. I attended NYU Law. I clerked on the Third Circuit Court of Appeals. I worked on Wall Street. And then I started a company with a friend of mine from college. I went to UVA. We started a company called In This Together Media to bring diversity to kids' books, diversity and inclusion to kids' books. So that's what I do for a living. So have been a racial and social justice advocate for years vis-a-vis kids' media. Have been a huge Democratic proponent and activist, donor, door knocker, canvasser. Had some Canadians live at my house for 6 months before the November 2016 election because they were here to volunteer for Hillary. My daughter and I, at the time my daughter was only 7, we would phone bank and canvass every day after school, like really, really, really hardcore. And last year, something very interesting happened. So this is 2018. I asked for something in return from all of the white liberal Democrats I had given money to and door knocked for and canvassed for, which was some answers in terms of what they were doing to make community color feel safe in light of the Muslim bans, ICE raid, DACA being repealed. And to say that the response was tepid is an understatement. My representative in Denver, Diana DeGette, who I primaried and lost on June 26th, held her one town hall of the year in Denver a few days after the first Muslim ban in early February of last year. ICE raids were happening all over Denver, and she held her one town hall of the year in the police building. So who's not going to show up at the police building? It's not wrong.
Yeah.
And this is a white liberal Democrat woman. Out of roughly 1,000 people who showed up, 6 were non-white, one of whom happened to be one of my best friends, Neethi Pawar, who's the founder of the South Asian Bar Association of Colorado. She went because she had spent the weekend at Denver International Airport, like she always does, boots on the ground, helping people who are, landing and getting sent back. She went to the police building where Diana DeGette was talking about stuff, I guess, that she had accomplished like 20 years earlier. Total, like a sea of non sequiturs. And Neethi stood up and said, "What are you doing to make your communities of color feel safe right now?" To which she answered, "Why would they feel unsafe?" And then Neethi said, "Oh my God, okay, what about DACA?" And she said, "What about DACA? We have an executive order in place for DACA." We all know how that executive order turned out, right? Neethi, she sent one of her staffers to kick Neethi out of the building. Okay, so Neethi then does a follow-up appointment with her staff, to which the staff member told her to her face, oh, I get it. Just so you know, civil rights aren't one of Diana DeGette's issues. So that's really nice. That's the dictionary definition of white privilege. Civil rights are life or death for those of us who are brown and black. So to have it not be one of your issues is rich and horrible, right? So then spent the rest of sort of last year kind of awakening and getting woke to, oh my God, these Democrats are not our friends necessarily, and went to Washington last fall and met with some white Democratic senators when I asked one about what she was doing about social justice, racial justice. And I said, I've been mining your social media. There's like nothing, right? Not even optically. You know what she said to me? Can't even make this up. I just posted about hidden figures on Instagram. Oh, good.
Oh.
So much better. So much better. Thank you.
Whoa.
So I, after this sort of year-long awakening, I wrote an article called "I'm a Brown Woman Who's Breaking Up with the Democratic Party." It was published by the Huffington Post. It went viral, and the response sort of mimicked how the past 6 months of my life have been, and I'm sure not unlike what you've experienced, Tamara. 3 basic buckets. One bucket, white, neoliberal, corporate, centrist Democrats. Bye, Felicia, you're a party traitor. See you later. The other side, white, brown, black, gay, straight, male, female. We used to think the Democratic Party was the lesser of two evils. Now we think they are worse because they're hypocrites. We are no longer voting again. And then I think to myself, is that the logical extreme, right? Am I going to disenfranchise myself? I couldn't imagine that. And then finally, a bunch of people saying, why don't you run for office yourself? So this is December of this past year. This is 7 months ago. And I'm thinking, this is crazy. Can't we expect more of our representatives? And then I got to thinking, my issue with these decades-long career incumbents in totally safe districts, instead of using their power and their privilege to advocate for the disenfranchised, they don't show up. They take millions of dollars from corporations, which Diana DeGette does. And they're not fighting for us, right? They're fighting for their corporate donors' profits. And I think I have privilege. I have class privilege. I can afford childcare. My husband is supportive. I'm able-bodied, which is a big privilege that you need to have in order to run for office. So if I don't at least challenge the status quo, shame on me. I didn't enter this race until mid-January of this year. I was one of the last, if not the last people in America to file with the FEC for the midterms. So get a sense of what happened during that time. I am obviously brown. I ran on an explicitly anti-racism platform in a majority white district in a hyper white state. In 20 weeks, not a dime of corporate PAC money, in 20 weeks, I got a third of the votes, 43,000 votes in 20 weeks.
Say that again. You got how many votes? Say that again.
Almost 43,000.
Wow.
Cutting in and out.
What's that?
Just lean closer to your camera when you're talking, so because you're cutting in and out. Close to your mic.
Please try a little later.
Close to 43,000 votes. Is that better? Can you hear me better now?
Yeah.
And so what that, and again, this is against an 11-term, 22-year incumbent chief deputy whip of the party. Had we had another month or two, I think we would have won soundly. And what that tells me is that people are ready. People are ready for change. People want change. People see the elephant in the room that you mentioned, that these are both parties that are not working for us. These are parties that are working, who, by the way, both parties founded on white supremacy and funded by companies. And that's where we are right now. That's where we are. That's why we have a situation where Maxine Waters, who is a true leader, stands up and says, we are not going to let Donald Trump do this to us anymore. We need to confront Donald Trump's people in public, right? And what do we get in return? We get Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer throwing her under the bus, calling her un-American, calling her unacceptable. How is that any different or better than Donald Trump? It's hard for me to see that. So what happened during my campaign was exactly, by the fragile white person's playbook. They questioned constantly, hourly, my qualifications. Just by way of qualifications, I went to the University of Virginia. I attended NYU Law School. I worked on the Third Circuit. I worked on Wall Street. I'm a successful entrepreneur. I lacked only one qualification. Guess what qualification that was? I'm not white.
You're not white.
That's the qualification I lacked. I was called a liar. I was called a cheatman. The Democratic Party made up a story that I was engaging in voter suppression. Spoiler alert, brown and black people don't engage in voter suppression. That actually happens to us. It doesn't go the other way. And that's a crime, accused of that. And so all that happened, it was crazy. It was actually constant. It was crazy. And this is in hyper progressive Denver, Colorado. So where it actually took a kind of a crazy turn, major plot twist, after the primary, which was about a week and a half ago, I was with my family up in the mountains resting, and I was on Twitter, and essay written by Dr. George Yancey from Emory, from Georgia. he had written an essay for the New York Times called "Should I Give Up on White People?" And have you read it, John? It looks like, yeah, okay. And so essentially, it's his story about toiling as a Black man, and ultimately he cannot undo white supremacy because it's incumbent upon those people who create these systems of oppression and benefit from these systems of oppression. So white people have to be responsible for dismantling white supremacy. So I retweeted, as a private citizen, I retweeted a New York Times essay. How many people do that every day, right? It's not a news story. I retweeted that and just wrote short and long answer, yes. So what happens next is white male liberal who calls himself a bold progressive, trademark bold progressive. His name is Paul Rosenthal. He's a state legislator in Colorado who got knocked off the ballot, right? He got knocked off the ballot for accusations of sexual harassment. So this dude is like not even gonna serve another term. Instead of going softly into the night and trying to like make himself a better person, he's chosen to troll me on Twitter. He then takes my tweet, retweets it, starts schooling me on how I'm a reverse racist. Also, not a thing. Schooling me on being a reverse racist. And then he tags a magazine called Colorado Politics, which is the local magazine on record covering, as you would guess, Colorado politics. So this guy named Joey Bunch, a reporter, I put that in quotes because he doesn't deserve the title, white dude from New Orleans, finds my cell phone number. I'm laying on the couch with my kids, finds my cell phone number, calls me on my cell phone, starts screaming at me, calling me a racist. By the way, this is like Nazi stuff from World War II. Reporters calling people, telling me that I'm a racist. And then he said, what do you mean by this? And I said, I mean exactly what I just said. White people have to dismantle white supremacy. Just like men have to dismantle misogyny. Women can't do that. White people have to dismantle white supremacy. I hang up the phone. I'm like, okay, whatever. He writes a story. And it says ex-congressional candidate has given up on white people. So suddenly the liberal white Colorado Democratic Party goes crazy. They start trashing me again. I'm like, whatever. So Michael Harriot, God bless him, from The Root. If you guys are not following Michael Harriot, everyone's got to follow Michael Harriot. Picks up the story and writes a hilarious piece, as he always does, titled "Denver Snowflakes Melt When Ex-Congressional Candidate Says She's Done with White People." Breitbart and the Daily Caller pick up his story, and the next thing you know, we're going to use Sairo Rao as target practice. She should go back to the Ganges and drown, and just a deluge of hate mail and threats. At which point I feel very uncomfortable. I've got 2 small kids. Everyone knows what they look like at this point, and they know where we live. So I think I'm going to get out of town. So we've left Denver temporarily. So this is not, they couldn't leave it there. So Westward, Denver Westward, which is the progressive magazine of Denver. Every city has one, right? Like they hire a white male meteorologist to do a hit piece on me and the only other person of color running, who he lost as well. His name is Joe Salazar. He was running for attorney general. He lost by less than 1 percentage point, and votes were still being tallied like a week after the primary. And so he didn't concede until the final votes were in. They called him the sorest loser and he lost to a white man, the sorest loser of the primaries. And I was up there as well. They called me promising, but suddenly I had turned, I'd gone haywire and angry, and people were like, now Saira can't win an election to be dog catcher. By the way, I'd much rather be a dog catcher than be in Congress at this point. In fact, we need a bunch of dog catchers to go to Congress and catch a bunch of those dogs. But so that's like that. And then now I have like white supporters of mine who are like calling me classless and angry. And let's be clear, all I did, and do I seem scared of you? I'm like a middle-aged Indian woman, right? Like, all I did was call out white supremacy. And what I got in return was a steaming pile of doo-doo from the Democratic Party. So, and Diana DeGette, who is my representative, has not called out the hate against me. Meanwhile, MLK weekend comes and they're tweeting about MLK and Gandhi and all this. When it comes down to it, when they actually have a brown constituent who is facing threats based on something that they've done, it's crickets, right? They go back underground until the next MLK weekend and until they're ready to tweet about Gandhi and being the change you want to be and all that. Like, you know what quote they never talk about with MLK is the quote about him saying, "What I've learned in life is the most dangerous people are white moderates. So let's swap out moderates and put in liberals," and it applies today. So that's where we are now. The great news, here's the great news, because they're always, there's always good news at the end. I just got a book deal, and it's all coming out. Names are going to be named. Emails will be quoted. Direct messages are going in there. So every single white person in Denver, Colorado, mostly white women, be on notice. Comeuppance is a mofo. And it's happening in the middle of October. So stay tuned for the book.
Oh, y'all see why I invited her on?
Oh my goodness.
OMG. OMG. Y'all see why I invited her on. She is on fire. I love you.
That's it. They try to humiliate, these are all silencing tactics, right? Public humiliation is a silencing tactic. I'm not humiliated. They should be humiliated. I'm not humiliated for tweeting that. They should be humiliated for turning it into a three-ring circus and making me feel unsafe and making my kids unsafe. They should be humiliated. So guess what? Speaking up and speaking out on supremacy is not humiliation. Being a white, fragile person, humiliated. You should be ashamed of yourself.
Y'all like her, don't you?
Oh.
David, y'all like it. David and John, y'all like her, don't you?
Oh, very, very much.
I'll tell you one thing, Sarah. I don't like that term, white fragile snowflakes. These people are aggressive. Right? They are defending white privilege aggressively. They're not snowflakes. Right. They're responding, from the position of power that they are exercising over you. And I would call it the delegation of power over the deputizing of people whose interests really are not aligned with those of the ruling elite. But they do, they take it, they are part of that agency of oppression. And so that among other things are some of the issues that I'd hope we could talk about and break down a little bit about how to analyze what's going on, both in your case, in Tamara's case, and within the Democratic Party. There's just an article in the New York Times this morning that I kind of skimmed through about candidates of color running in predominantly white districts. And very, very interesting. What they feel that they have to do in the to run a race in a predominantly white district. Some of them are pulling in their horns, so to speak. They're covering, as I forget his name, the law professor. It's got a Japanese name. Wrote this book, Covering. So some of them are trying to be not, quote, too militant, and others of them, like you and Tamara, have really come out boldly and and expressed your calling it, telling it like it is, right? And unfortunately, where we are. We still have work to do in these areas where people still maintain racial inequality as normal. This is what we're faced with. They still feel like this is normal, and part of the reason they're coming after you is you are kicking over the apple cart. They can no longer see it as normal, or see themselves as innocent.
Right. No, that's absolutely right. And something that's really sort of interesting to me is I understand my privilege as an Asian American woman, which is privilege that Black women don't have and Latina women don't have. And And one thing that I felt like I was able to say things. So I'll just give you an example. I did a fundraiser in Washington, and it was with a bunch of very wealthy white people. And one of my friends said, kind of tone it down for this crowd. Like, maybe don't talk about Black Lives Matter, whatever. And I was like, I don't tone I don't have to code switch, which is a privilege that I have. And so I stood up and I gave my whole spiel down to the Black Lives Matter, all of it. Guess what happened? They listened. They listened to me. I made them a lot less uncomfortable than if Tamara had said the same thing, right? So that is, and that is my privilege. And I had chosen, and I'll tell you, not just white people who have come for me a lot are fellow South Asian. So a lot of Indians have said to me out loud, why are you doing this? Like, you've arrived, you guys have made a decent living, you went to all the fancy schools. And I've said to them, they know that you're not white. I hate to break the news to you, but you're not passing. Like, you might think you are, but you're not. And so it's incumbent on all of us to use whatever power and privilege we have. And there are hierarchies, and it goes this way and that way. But I'm using it, I'm using it to the extent I can. And I've gotten a lot of hate from all sorts of places, where, including, frankly, Black women who are also like, stop. There's a fairly prominent Black woman in Denver who has been very critical of everything I've done and doing, because she and people like her think that I'm messing it up for them. Like, just shut your mouth, stay in line. And why? We have nothing to lose. We have nothing. We literally have nothing. And you live once, and all you can hope to do is leave this place a better place than you found it. And right now, it's a much worse place than I found it in 1974, born and raised in Richmond, Virginia. So I'm not going softly into the night. The more humiliation they try to lob at me, I'm going to get louder and bigger, and I'm not going away. And I don't think that they know that's why they send me white male meteorologists for hit pieces, because they don't know what else to do, And you know what? Maybe we'll switch places. His name is Chris Bianchi. I'm naming names. Google him, Bianchi. He's a meteorologist. I'd like to take his job for a minute. And here's the weather I'm predicting. It's raining white supremacy. That's my forecast, Chris Bianchi. And you just fell right into the trap, Chris Bianchi.
Oh, y'all see? I told y'all to get ready for her, right? I told you. John, you hear her?
Yes, it's interesting that they reacted to your retweet of that New York Times article by Yancey. I mean, and I get it, because he's another truth teller. I'm a big fan of his, as you can see. Awesome. And I actually retweeted that same article with them, because I'm a nobody, so nobody looked at. But I think what it hits to is the psychology of racism. And that's something that's so apparent. And as you said, it affects us as Black people. We fall, victim to it. They're attacking you. It happens to the society as a whole. And it cuts across the issues of class. It's that stay in your place kind of mentality.
Lane, yeah.
Caste and class. You cross that, you put your finger on it, and you call that out. They get very uncomfortable. I just thank you for your fieriness. And
it takes all kinds, right? And I do think it's important that, hold on one second.
Can you smell the milk as a dad?
I'm smelling the milk.
I remember when my kids were that age that, it would be a lot of times. My son one time, he was saying, mommy, and I was like, wait a minute. And I looked back, and the kid had literally sliced his finger off. So I get it, smell the milk.
Milk, and she's right, it doesn't smell very good. It takes all kinds, and it takes all of us to do this, because it's not just the Democratic Party, right? It's every institution working in tandem to support supremacy. So the liberal white news media. So get this. After this happened with Maxine Waters and Pelosi, and by the way, there are 200 Black women who wrote a letter to Pelosi and Schumer demanding that they issue a public apology. Crickets from them, right? Nothing. But the New York Times, the bastion of liberal media, did a front page story on how Alan Dershowitz was feeling shunned on Martha's Vineyard because he's like a Trump supporter. I mean, you can't even make it up. It's like The Onion, right? It's like an SNL skit. Did they cover Pelosi and Schumer on Maxine Waters? No, they didn't. So when the right says that we're engaging in fake news, they're not wrong about that. We're all engaging in fake news. We're all selectively deciding what's news. And the liberal news media has decided on a small level that it's news that I tweeted a New York Times article. And the New York Times has decided that Alan Dershowitz not getting a lobster roll in Martha's Vineyard is much, much worse than Maxine Waters getting a bullseye painted to her back by the Democratic Party leadership. So let's be clear. Schumer, Pelosi, they are white supremacists. That's what they are. Let's call it what it is. Let's stop dancing around the issue. They are white supremacists. They need to be voted out.
I'm so thankful that you came on. I'm so thankful. David, she's on fire. You thought I was a little flame. She's a burning building. I'm loving it.
Well, I wanted to make a suggestion about framing the analysis a little better. But first of all, just want to say MSNBC, the great spokespeople for, and representatives of liberal democracy or democratic, liberalism, Democratic Party liberalism, have completely shut down almost any other news but this Russiagate stuff.
Yep.
And it is now, I'm not sure how I feel about the Russiagate. The evidence seems to be really pretty strong, but the voter suppression in this country is not coming from Russia. Voter suppression has been around longer than the hacking and all of the other things that have been going on. And nobody talks about how the Democratic Party, particularly its chair, Debbie Wasserman Schultz, in 2016, was able to manipulate the primary campaign. Mm-hmm. So we completely lost all of the focus and the attention on how that primary campaign was how would you call it, engineered, or built in order to ensure Hillary Clinton's nomination, which then ended up I guess we could have a debate about this, but I think that Bernie Sanders could have won against Trump, hands down. So that's one aspect of this kind of I don't know what to call it exactly, doublethink, that's going on. It's Orwellian almost.
Right.
And the other thing though is how do we address these these issues? How do we either build? I think it's really up in the air now what's going to happen within the Democratic Party. Because there is a really large-scale insurgency going on. Wouldn't you say? You're much closer than I am to it, but I really do see.
I agree.
Yeah, and the question is, is the Democratic establishment going to be able to contain it? Right. That's really what we're doing.
Can I just interrupt? I think that's exactly right. But I think the question is, why would the Democratic establishment want to contain it? That's the question.
Yeah, that's the next item on the agenda. And one of the things I brought up last week is that part of the reason is that the Democratic Party, just like the Republican Party, represents the 9.9%, the group that's under the 0.1% that actually is the rulers in this country. And what we have to kind of break down and analyze is what's going on within the 90%, because the 90% of us who are mostly working people, right, have been this is where racial privilege, I think, works its success in maintaining social control. But among those European Americans who are part of that 90%, racial privilege does not benefit them. It actually hurts them. What really brings benefits in this country, in my opinion at least, is class privilege of the 9.9%. And there was just a major article in the Atlantic about how this group has pulled up the ladder behind them. That they are now well, he calls it an aristocracy, but what I would say is an upper middle class, strata that runs the society, and that the society actually, provides benefits for. For the rest of us, including European American working people, there are no benefits. Things are getting worse and worse and worse. And so there is a real opening there, I think, for the people who are already organized, namely, African American, Latino, and other people of color who can take leadership. And this is you're absolutely right that that this is not Black people's responsibility to change whites, but we have to bring along folks like me with a new mindset about where the class differences lie between those folks who run the Democratic Party and who are very, very aggressive in protecting their interests in the 9.9%, versus those folks who are, renters, who don't itemize their taxes, who are, all of these other things that give these tremendous advantages to people who are in the 9.9%. Let me just, for just one example, because this is from a book by Dean Baker, of the Economic Policy Research Institute, called Rigged. His book came out in 2016, and he makes the point that all working people have been open to the competition of globalization, right? It's a major factor. It may not be the only one because of technology and all of the other things that are going on, but they have been open, and their wages have been really undermined by global competition. There's the group of people where the federal government, the government policy maintains protectionism is doctors and lawyers. Doctors and lawyers who make $200,000 to $400,000 a year. And they have been, the protection has been maintained for them. You cannot practice medicine in the United States without going through a residency in the United States, right? You can't practice law, and this is also true not just in terms of protecting them from international competition, but protecting them from people who are in the skilled worker category. In other words, for doctors, it would be physician's assistants and nurse practitioners and midwives and folks like that. For lawyers, it would be, law, I'm blanking out on the name. Paralegals, yes, paralegals. There are massive amounts of work that could be done by those folks, at salaries that are obviously much less. It would bring down the whole cost of medical care and of legal services in this country by hundreds of billions of dollars a year to have those people be able to take on more responsibility. But we have a protectionist system And it's not just doctors and lawyers, but it is primarily them. Just for an example, so we're dealing with a different class of people when we're talking about those folks, as opposed to working people who, European American working people who are working in factories and service jobs and clerks and, big box stores and that kind. And I think it's really important that we make a distinction between those two groups and not just throw all white people into the same bin, right? The role that whites play as whites, in other words, as deputies to the ruling elite, is there. But for a large number of them, what they're doing is shooting themselves in their own foot. All right, so that we need to be, I think, much more deliberate, and strategic about how we deal with white supremacy than we can, unless people of color want to form their own party, right?
Let me jump in, David, real quick.
Yeah, sorry,
The call-in number on the screen is 929-477-3442. We have our guests on fire with her today, Sairo Rao. Of course, Mr. John Armwood, who we always talk about withholding the vote. David Slavin, where we talk about acknowledging the divide, and I am yours truly, Tamara Johnson Shealey. So call in. Again, the call-in number is 929-477-3442. Don't be shy. I'm sure Sarah would love to hear from you. Sarah, you have some fans that are chiming in. They said that they voted for you and they stand for you, and they're excited about all that you're doing in Colorado. So you're doing it, girl.
I want to just respond to one thing David said. I don't disagree with a lot of what you're saying. I do think that we need to stop seeing class privilege and white privilege as mutually exclusive. And so it's when we talk about white privilege, it's not saying, all white people are rich. All it's saying is that white people enjoy a privilege. For example, white people don't get gunned down on the street by police officers. Even poor white people don't get gunned down on the street by police officers. When we talk about ICE raids happening all over the country, they are not raiding white places. They are raiding predominantly brown places. The kids who are getting separated at the border are not kids who are coming in from Norway. So and yes, obviously there's a tremendous amount of poverty. We're talking about the 1% and the bottom 99%. So there's a tremendous amount of poverty. There is a minuscule amount of this country that's benefiting from both parties right now. And that's exactly what you're saying. I just want to be careful to say that there is, even poor white people enjoy white privilege. And it doesn't mean that they're not suffering and their lives don't suck. It just means that they're not worried about becoming the next Antoine Rose. That's all.
Yeah. Okay. Go ahead. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to. Go ahead.
More about
John.
Hello.
Yeah.
Sarah, I'd like you to talk a little bit more about that intersection of racial white privilege, what I would call status privilege, and class, because there's a lot of discourse. I know it's obvious to me that you've been involved with critical race studies and that intersection. I'd like to get your feelings on that intersection and the tension that you see that you've mentioned earlier in the Democratic Party. And I've seen this also seems to be a reflection not just of class, but of racial status. And I'd like to hear you talk a little bit about that issue.
Sure. And look, all you need to do is Google, which I do every once in a while just for fun. Google 10 richest people in America and see what comes up. Google Congress and just look at their picture, right? That's all you need to do is look at their picture. To give you a sense of just sort of the intersection of class and race, though, in Denver, guess how much Black Denverites make on the dollar versus white Denverites? Just guess.
$3 or $4?
33 cents to the dollar. So for every dollar a white Denverite makes, a Black Denverite makes 33 cents. So that gives you a sense of how inextricably linked those two things are. I guess I'm less interested about delving into that and just more interested in people understanding what privilege means. When men will say, well, I'm a guy, but I haven't benefited from being a guy. That's not true. And I say that to my brown husband, like, of course he has. And if you look at, if he had run for Congress instead of me, he would have had a much easier time. He would have had a much harder time than a white woman or a white male, but he would have an easier time over me, right? And just like I said, I had an easier time than if I was Latina or Black. And so it's not to say that I clearly have not, I have like a death threats, right? Like, it hasn't been a walk in the park for me, but I understand where I am on the hierarchy of privilege. And I don't know that look, America is not a smart country. Our education system sucks. We're the richest country in the world, and our public schools are figuratively and literally falling apart. So we lack, by and large, critical thinking skills. And as a result, I don't think most people understand even what privilege is. It doesn't mean that you've had like a wonderful life, right? And so even able-bodied privilege, we don't ever talk about that. Like being able to walk without pain and crisscross your district or your state or whatever it is you're running for, that is privilege. So it's not, again, that it's easy for you. It just means that you're not in chronic pain, or you're not having to get home to have dialysis or chemo, or you're not in a wheelchair. So that's all I am talking about, is all of us recognizing that which we have been given. And by the way, I did nothing to have the privilege. I was born into a family. My parents were immigrants who came over. They weren't kidnapped from Africa and sold into slavery. They came over in post 1964 Civil Rights Act and Immigration Act because we had a brain drain, right, for doctors and engineers. So that's why there's so many Indian doctors and engineers from that time. They didn't make a ton of money, but we were solidly middle class. And as a result, I never was hungry. I didn't go to school hungry. I went to private school. I got to go to UVA. All this stuff was bestowed upon me, and I did nothing to earn that, right? That is privilege. That is what privilege is. Just recognize it and recognize how you've benefited from it. And that's all, like, that is all I'm talking about, is if everyone kind of understands where their privilege is and how they can use that to benefit and advocate for people who don't have that same privilege, we would be a much more empathic country. And that the profound and acute lack of empathy in this country is why we have Donald Trump today. It is very clear to me why we have Donald Trump. We are a country based on genocide of indigenous people. And then our economy was based on the kidnapping of Black people and forcing them into slavery, right? We haven't had truth and reconciliation, let alone reparations, which needs to happen. We don't even acknowledge that this is what's happened. And again, I'm in the kids' book business, and super white liberal editor in New York City who I met with 2 years ago, my partner and I wanted to do a kids' picture book on genocide, on the Native American genocide, because Thanksgiving makes my blood boil. And I wanted, there's gotta be a way to teach kids. You know what she said to me? Well, where's the happy ending? And I was like, happy ending? There is no happy ending. There is no happy ending. This is just the truth. And she goes, yeah, that's not gonna happen. And so look at what Germany did post World War II, right? They went deep on the truth and reconciliation. Sadly, the right now has come back and is about to rear its ugly head over there. But a friend of mine who was raised in Berlin, he's Iranian, his family fled Iran in the 80s, but raised in Berlin. And I said, when did you first learn about the Holocaust? And you know what he said to me? I don't remember a time where I didn't know about the Holocaust. Why do our kids not know about Native American genocide? And why do we like act like slavery was like a cute little thing that happened in our way past and it's not around today? Why do we act shocked when Charlottesville happens? None of that's shocking. And then why are our liberal friends on Facebook posting memes about like the Nazi torchbearers and the Confederate flags and the swastikas? What on earth are they doing to actually dismantle the white supremacy from which they benefit every single day? That's what I want to know. And I think that's what we don't talk about. And I think, liberal, there's a word for it. It's called liberal white supremacy. My friend Vanessa Quintana in Denver is a total badass. She's going to change the world. She's about to go to Berkeley, first kid in her family to go to college. Just got like a huge scholarship to get her master's at Berkeley. She talks about liberal white supremacy all the time. And it makes the white people melt. I mean, those were like, it's like, no, make it stop. White supremacy is the part of the Republicans. That's not true. Alive and well in both parties. And so, John, I don't know a lot about what you do, but it sounds like you talk about like withholding the vote, or is that what we're talking about? Like
strategic voting.
Okay, talk to me about that. Talk to me about that.
It's addressing the issues that you are talking about with liberal Democrats, to the point of Democrats can't get elected in many areas without people of color's support. They take it for granted. They come around election time, they make fancy promises, and then they go to Washington, they sacrifice the DACA kids. They don't support legislation that benefits the people as a whole. Strategically, we have to decide that if candidates are going to behave like that, we have to punish them by withholding the vote strategically when it's in our interest. And so, and one other kind. In other words, we're holding people accountable.
Yep, I agree.
We have to earn our vote.
I agree.
That's what we're saying.
I agree. I couldn't agree more. And, just to give you an example, back to Joe Salazar, who was running for Attorney General, he said on the campaign trail repeatedly, would he blindly endorse, which he has endorsed Phil Weiser, who's running, and Phil's a good guy.
I'm sorry.
He said, would he blindly endorse him? And he said, no, I need to talk to him about what it looks like for him to be a white ally in our communities of color. Joe was tarred and feathered by the party for saying that. Tarred and feathered. And it really is this, it's not just tokenism, it's a sense of entitlement. Like they are entitled to us. And I'll say this right now, right here. The woman that I ran against kicked me out of her office when I told her I was running. She hung up on me on election night when I called to congratulate her. She has not publicly denounced the hate against me. So am I going to vote for her?
No.
Nope. And I would highly advise all of my supporters to withhold the vote from her as well.
What? This girl is on fire.
It's a white supremacist. I mean, why would I vote for a white supremacist? It doesn't even make any sense. So yeah, I'm with you, John. I 1,000% agree with that.
I am sitting here like literally on fire with you, Sarah. I knew that you were going to bring it today. I'm telling you, with this withhold the vote, it's about, like John said, holding people accountable. And the same thing happened in my race. Will I be voting for Sally Harrell? Absolutely not.
Nope.
Absolutely not. She ran a race against me, and it was obvious and everybody knows it. Will I be voting for her? Absolutely not.
Ooh, I like that race. Can I use that?
It was a race. Absolutely. I actually wrote an article. I'll send it. I wrote an article. I blogged about the race that was ran against me right here in Senate District 40.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
I'm writing in Tamara Shealey Johnson myself.
Yes.
I've been writing in votes, for all my years. I mean, I remember back in the 70s voting communist as opposed to voting for Ed Koch for mayor. When I lived in New York.
Yeah. We're not, you know what, we won't just be giving away our votes. They're too precious. And you know what, people always guilt and shame people into voting and say stuff like, well, people died for us. Yes, they died for us, but there has to be some strategy behind these votes. You can't just have this vote. That's why it's that precious. I won't just give it to you for free. I won't.
Yeah, and I think a really good sort of solid thing we could wrap our brains around is ICE. And ICE right now is operating like the Gestapo did, right? Totally down to the wire. A very easy, and I was at the World Trade Center on September 11th. I was a third-year law student at NYU, and I was working on Tuesdays that semester at the U.S. Attorney's Office. So I was years when shortly after the second plane had hit, and I was there when the buildings fell, and I was one of those people running up Church Street. I remember the xenophobic frenzy that happened post facto that gave us ICE, right? ICE was passed in legislation very quickly, and there's no accountability. ICE has absolutely no accountability. So if we know that, why is it that Democrats aren't willing to defund ICE? And if you ask Democrats why, Diana DeGette said ICE is doing some good, legitimate things. Governor John Hickenlooper of Colorado said the same thing. ICE has some legitimate functions. Okay, so let's just use the example of the Gestapo. I bet the Gestapo was rescuing some Nazis' cats from trees, right? Like, I'm sure the Gestapo did some really awesome things, but you know, rounding up Jews and sending them to the oven kind of feels like you could be judged by that rather than the other, right? So ICE, in my opinion, is a real deal breaker. And so anybody in Congress that is not willing, and you know who's trying to defund ICE now? It's people, it's the handful of people of color in Congress, because they get it. And if you're not willing to defund ICE and vote to defund ICE, I think you have to be voted out. It's as simple as that. And now we have the numbers. It's not like such a weird thing. We have the numbers collectively. If people of color, and here's the final thing I do want to say, and then I know we're breaking. I do think us brown and black folks have to get together. And so one thing that was really interesting to me when I was campaigning is I met with this Asian American woman who said, you know, Saira, you talk a lot about DACA and the DREAM Act, and a lot of people of your ilk, South Asians, feel upset that you're not talking about specifically our visa issues. And I said, how about this? It's amazing that DACA has become a household term. What if we actually pass a Clean Dream Act, right? That opens up the door to comprehensive immigration reform with a path to citizenship. How about we get together here rather than pit each other? This is patriarchal notions of scarcity, right? We're fighting over scraps. Let's stop fighting over scraps. Let's get the Asian community together. Let's get the Black community together. Let's get the Latinx community together. And our numbers combined, we house these people. We send them out. We get them out of there, and we get our people in. So that has to happen. We have to band together and stop fighting over scraps, because there aren't scraps. That's all been made up by the white patriarchy.
That should be the strategy for the Democratic Party. Like, that should be their strategy. Everything you just said should be the strategy for the Democratic Party. But instead, they keep pandering to the moderates as if they're going to come back. They're going to come back. Those people are gone. They're Republicans. They're gone. They're not coming back.
That's right.
But the other aspect of it, just to throw something in, is how you might appeal to poor whites in that circumstance. I'm not disagreeing with a lot that you say. We may have some theoretical disagreements on, but my feeling is that inequality and benefits are two different things. The inequality between Black and white working people is stark and very, very real. But in the case of your example of ICE, the fact that there is an agency in the United States, in U.S. Homeland Security Department, that is out there making it unsafe for working people to make a living, to earn a living, means that they are more vulnerable to their employers, to their bosses.
That's right. That's a really good point. Yep.
Yeah, and so the appeal to working people, to European American working people, I don't like to use the term white except as a derogatory term, right? But European American working people may not be reached on the first go round about this, but if you appeal to solidarity, not just as an emotional connection, but as the fact that this makes things harder for every working class person to have people who are that vulnerable. Also, people who are getting out of prison.
Yep.
Anybody who is undocumented or is a formerly incarcerated has a vulnerability to their bosses that drags the whole working class down. So
Right.
the appeal to solidarity, I think, is now the point is here. We don't know how many people this is going to include, but leaving votes on the table,
Yes.
so to speak, is a mistake. You know, it's and we don't know how many of those people, you know, European American working people, acting in solidarity, not as allies, but as accomplices, acting in solidarity rather than simply doing somebody else a favor. How many of those people does it take before the whole white privilege system is undermined, is eroded?
That's a really good point.
It's not a majority. We don't need a majority. We just need these race traders, you know, to be taking the side not of their, you know, of their you know, friends, or being their you know, the liberal, you know, idea of, well, I get a certificate of innocence out of this, or a certificate of redemption, you know. But hey, these are my interests.
Right.
Your interests are my interests.
Right.
And so the distinction, the underlying distinction that I see is that there is one group of working people in this country who is both exploited and subordinated.
David, we're at the top of the hour, so I wanted to keep this broadcast right at about an hour. And I just want to
finish the point. And the other group that is both exploited and privileged. Okay, those two groups are the two basic groups that we have in the working class in this country. And those folks who are in the privileged position have to throw off those privileges because they're killing them.
Right.
Okay, that's your
point. Sarah, I want to say thank you for joining David and I joining us on this broadcast. We do this every Friday at 11 a.m. where we have the hard conversations about race, racism, and race relations, the problems inside the Democratic Party. We're not going to go away. We're going to continue to speak truth to power. And when that book is out, I don't care where I am, what I'm doing. I'm going to have to do a live broadcast, but I'm going to be there somewhere so that people will know that you are, you know, this is out, and we need this. We need this.
All right. Thanks, guys.
Thank you, Sarah. Have a good one. Thank you. Thank you for joining us on this broadcast. It's always a pleasure with my two friends, Mr. John Armand and Mr. David Slavin. Did y'all enjoy her or what? Say it again, John.
She was on it.
Yeah.
She was on fire. I told you. She is, you know what? Sometimes somebody said to me, if I hadn't lost the race, would I be doing this? And, I had to think about it. I was like, that's why I lost this race. So that I could do this, because it's the next level of the work that needs to be done.
Right.
Okay, where we are politically and all that we're doing, because I know this is the next civil rights movement. Those of us that are willing to withhold the vote and hold these candidates and elected officials accountable, and those that are willing and bold enough to acknowledge the divide. Right. John, David, this was a great broadcast.
Oh, yeah.
Next Friday, 11 a.m., same time, same channel.
There you go.
Hey.
All right, thank you for joining us on this broadcast. We had a lot of people viewing. Share. Please share this broadcast. Spread the word. We will be back next Friday. You never know who we're going to have on. So join us again next Friday at 11 a.m. right here on Facebook Live, YouTube, and Blog Talk Radio. Have a great one.